For how Canadians can help with this is Joseph Bellevue, the Executive Director of MSF Canada. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I understand the situation in Gaza has been quite dire for the past 16 years due to the blockades through Israel and Egypt. But talk about the situation now that the airstrikes have happened and with the Israeli government vowing to cut off electricity and water.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. Indeed, you mentioned airstrikes. I think airstrikes is probably the most consistent message that we've been receiving from my colleagues at Doctors Without Borders in Gaza over the last few days. And it's based on the descriptions. It's hard to imagine that there's discrimination in the targeting. So my colleagues are just describing almost incessant airstrikes hitting neighborhoods. One colleague was describing how the building right next door to the MSF office in Gaza City was struck and destroyed. Many of my MSF colleagues have been displaced from their homes, some because their homes were hit by the bombing. Medical facilities also, and of course, all of this runs contrary to international humanitarian law or the Geneva Conventions, which demand that there is that discrimination between civilian targets and military targets. And we have had one of the hospitals that Doctors Without Borders or MSF is supporting was hit and damaged. An ambulance was actually struck right outside, right out front of the hospital, one of the hospitals MSF is supporting. The driver died in that incident. And, at the moment, we're not even able to use ambulances to transport wounded people around Gaza for fear that those ambulances could be hit en route.
Joseph, one of the things we hear time and time again out of the Middle East and out of that region in particular is the concept of Hamas using civilians as human shields, therefore making the Israeli attacks more difficult to sort of avoid civilian casualties versus Hamas casualties, et cetera. How much more difficult does that then make the job of Doctors Without Borders, and what's your experience with that? What do you understand about that?
Yeah, I can't speak to the specific instances of whether or not human shields are being used, but what we can speak to is just this widespread, completely unpredictable and large, what appears to be indiscriminate bombing. And so what that results in terms of our ability to operate is that it's very difficult to move around the streets. So I mentioned the problem of just using ambulances, but even just moving around the streets, as the images are showing here now, is extremely challenging. The hospitals are overrun. Overwhelmed is the word that my colleagues are using with injured people. So there's just this constant flow of people coming in, but there's some damage to the hospitals. And then when we talk about supplies to continue to run those hospitals, now Doctors Without Borders, MSF, we've been there for over 20 years now. So we have teams on the ground. We have medical supplies that we're able to put into immediate use. But when we're talking about the functioning of these medical facilities over time, it looks really problematic. One colleague was describing how the electricity has been cut, so they've had to move to generators. They have fuel left. This was yesterday. As of yesterday, they had fuel left for 12 more hours of running that hospital. Imagine trying to run a hospital without power, let alone the medical supplies, the food supplies, and so on. So. Extremely challenging. One other little anecdote perhaps to share is we've set up a clinic right in downtown Gaza that's to assist with the triage and to bring some medical services a bit closer to where other people might otherwise not have access. And yesterday, all of the people who we triaged and treated for injuries and transferred were children. So children between the ages of 10 and 14. So this really indicates that there's something really amiss in terms of this distinction between civilian targeting and non-civilian.
Joseph, I'm sorry, we've lost our ability to see you right now, and we're really tight on time. Can I quickly ask you, we've talked about 10 tons of supplies coming in. Will that make much of a dent in the situation, the dire need there?
At this point, any little bit is going to help. As I said, we had pre-positioned stocks in place, so we were able to kind of jump right into action. By the way, we've also offered our services on the Israeli side, knowing that there's a huge number of casualties there, whatever we can do to help on that side as well. Yeah. But in this side, on the Gaza side, because of this siege and this complete blockade, something is going to need to give there. Otherwise, there is going to be a collapse of medical services, and the humanitarian situation is going to move from horrific to absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah, even with the warnings of airstrikes, there really is nowhere to go. Joseph Bellevue, the executive director of MSF Canada, thank you so much for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Joseph.
My pleasure. Thank you.